So now moving on to number seven. Ooh, this is going to be a long episode. Number seven, we have Good Kid, Mad City by Kendrick Lamar. We both briefly mentioned this album, of course. So it was his me and Ty were talking about this a little bit. This was his sophomore album. I couldn't remember if this was his debut studio album or his sophomore, but I think it was his sophomore album. I think Section 80, I don't know if he just released that on TDE before TDE became a part of Aftermath or Interscope,
Mm.
but this kind of it felt more like Kendrick Lamar's debut album because it's the one that kind of put him on the map. Like
It
this is the
yeah.
one that kind of brought Kendrick Lamar to hip hop and said like, "Hey, here he is." And
Mhm.
to me, it perfectly belongs on this list. I think if I had, like I said, if I was trying to choose an album that really represents hip hop, there's still one that I would choose over this one, but it's very, very close and very up there. And you guys will know what it is once we get there. But I think this is a perfect representation. I think it's definitely the perfect representation of Compton in California. Kendrick
Mhm.
Lamar really puts a lot of love for his city and a lot of storytelling about the way he grew up, mixed in with a lot of oh, what's the right word I'm looking for? I can't even think of the right word I'm looking for. But either way, this album, like The Art of Peer Pressure, one of my favorite songs is Sing About Me, I'm Dying of Thirst. I think that's my favorite song. That's a standout for me on the album. Especially when he has that line like, now if I die before my album drop, and then you just hear the gunshots ring out, and it's like, yeah, I mean, like that's part of like the culture and what he's pushing forward. I love Swimming Pools Drank. To me, I think the only thing that would have pushed this album like to the top is if I don't know if you ever heard the song Nostalgia by Pusha T.
Mhm.
And if you could have flipped that around and had that song, it's Pusha T featuring Kendrick Lamar. It really should be Kendrick Lamar featuring Pusha T because that song is talking about what, because like Pusha T is like 10 or 15 years older than Kendrick. So in the 80s, Pusha T was like the guy slinging the dope, and Kendrick was a kid in the 80s. And so they talk about it from both perspectives. Pusha T talks about what it's like to be like the leader of the gang, and Kendrick talks about what it is like from perspective of a kid whose aunt stole his Sega Genesis and sold it so that way she could go buy more crack. And like the way Kendrick weaves the verses on that, like I feel like that verse represents this entire album. And I'm like, that's my favorite verse by him of all time. And we're not even talking about that song or that album, but I have to talk about it when we talk about Kendrick Lamar because I feel like that completely represents it. But to me, standout tracks, like I said, The Art of Peer Pressure. I love Poetic Justice, and I think Drake's First is one of the. I think this is best feature of all time. Like when I'm thinking, I can't really think of another one that Drake's really outdone. And I kind of think it's like the best featured verse on this album, because it's just so it fits perfectly with the song and with the story that's being told. Um, so yeah, I think this song definitely belongs here on this list. I don't know if I would put it above Lemonade. I think I kind of like Lemonade better than this one. So I don't know if this one would kind of sit around nine for me, but I haven't heard Nirvana's album, so I couldn't really compare it to that. But I still think this is definitely a top 10 album when we're talking about the music industry.
I agree. I feel like that album in particular is perfectly placed. I think it 110% deserves to be on this list exactly where it is. It's not on my list there, but I do think it deserves to be there. One just like Kendrick Lamar in general, especially like that album. It was like a really good album. Like I'm looking at it here, and there's a lot of songs that I just like you said, Poetic Justice. Also, Don't Kill My Vibe. That was a bop. Like,
Oh yeah, I forgot about that one. Yeah, and I love Jay Z's remix of it. Oh, that
mm.
was so good.
But I love he's such a clever rapper. He's so
Mhm.
clever and so much stuff is so layered. And I personally feel like he really takes out his time. And so, yes, this belongs here. I approve. My stamp of approval.
Oh.
It's definitely got like easier to go back and listen to singles than something that's more dense and conceptual like To Pimp a Butterfly. for
Mhm.
Kendrick Lamar. That is definitely heavier to go back and listen to. But I think for me, that fits my taste a little bit more. That if you have a top 10 and you're only going to have one, I get more enjoyment out of those big, meaty, like concept albums that are just a giant story. Not that there isn't a story to tell here, but I think TPAB is way more layered, and like I'm constantly learning something new every time I listen to it, more
Mhm.
than I am, I think, here. But amazing album. They should both be on this list.
Yeah, I think they mentioned that a little bit in the podcast. They felt like one guy mentioned that like, this album is a little more accessible for someone that doesn't necessarily want to like break apart an album. And like me and Ty were talking about, I'm like, to me, the more I have to listen to an album, the better it is. And again, we're gonna talk a lot about that when we get up to my top albums. Quick side note while we're talking about Kendrick Lamar, when the Drake Kendrick beef started, Kendrick was number 38. Kendrick is now the eighth most popular artist in the entire world. Guess who's at number 7?
A
Drake.
dot.
Drake.
Ooh.
Kendrick and Drake. And when the beef started, Drake was like, "SZA's more popular than you, 21 Savage, Travis Scott." Not anymore. It
Not
is
anymore.
Drake and then
Hey.
Kendrick. And there's about 5 million listeners between them. So I don't know if he'll bridge that gap, but I thought that was just incredible. All right. So now we're talking about our personal picks for album number 7. And why don't we start with Ty? What do you have at number 7?
So this will be very surprising to you, Will. This
Okay.
is I think I learned this kind of making this list, what has become my favorite rap album.
Okay.
And it is sitting at number 7, and it is Tyler the Creator's Igor.
It's not as I'm kind of I'm not that surprised actually.
No,
No.
I was just talking about it, but I love concept albums. I love an album that Will and I have talked about this at length many times, of how much we appreciate the art of like composing an album and not just a collection of hits or singles. And
Mhm.
Igor, I think, is one of those that, like, at his time, it was absolutely his best work. I think it is Tyler the Creator's best album. And he's not an artist that I even particularly cared for a lot in his early career with like Cherry Bomb or Goblin. I really did not like
I was gonna say he had some
much of,
very interesting lines early in his career.
but Flower Boy was really great. Igor, I think, is a perfect hip hop concept album. And for me, I love what he's so experimental with weaving like electronic and pop into his stylings, as well as all of his live performances when he was on tour for this album. He became Igor. Igor wasn't just an album. It is very reminiscent of a certain artist that I will talk way more about later, who kind
Hmm.
of embodied a persona both inside and outside of the studio booth. And he did it on this, just, to me, a brilliantly sounding album about a relationship.
Yeah.
And it's amazing. I love it so much. I listen to it all the time. Zero skips. If you've never listened to it, please listen to it.
So how do you feel? So like the official Apple Music list has Flower Boy coming in at number 92 by Tyler the Creator, and it looks like they don't have Igor on here, and it looks like they
No.
feel like his best album is Flower Boy. How do you feel about that comparison wise?
I think it's the wrong choice. I
Yeah.
think Flower Boy is maybe a little bit more like easy listening to. I mean, there's some it's a really good album, but Igor is something special to me. I think
Okay.
it's way more interesting. Like it changed Tyler's like style. Like he was nothing like that before. Igor, it took on a personality. It's more influential, I think. I think it'll stand the test of time a little bit more than Flower Boy will. I think it's something that will be looked back upon years from now.
Interesting. So this is gonna sound weird, but I've never really listened to any of his music.
No?
And no,
Oh,
this is gonna sound weird, but I've actually actively avoided listening to his music.
I don't blame you for the
For
most
early in
part.
his career, yeah, I think that probably was the right choice.
A
Like, I
lot of
can't
it
blame you for that, at least.
a
Yeah.
lot of it
Oh,
early was very just like that edgy 2000s like humor that kind of by this point is so like dated and gross
yeah.
that it's not worth. I don't think there's anything worth listening to from his old discography.
But I think when you look at his old stuff, like someone once brought out a good point too. It's like I used to think that Two Chains was one of the worst rappers ever because he's had so many just god awful verses. Like I would actively skip verses that he's been on. And then he did songs like No Problem featuring Chance the Rapper. I mean that on Chance the Rapper's. Oh, it
Hmm.
did the thumbs up thing again.
Yeah, I did.
He did No Problem. He had a fantastic verse on a remix of Chloroseptic by Eminem. And then he had another really good verse on Drake's song featuring Young Thug in him, Sacrifices. And I was like, I didn't know he could rap like this. And someone's like, there's a lot of comments saying that like maybe he started off like they think he was just being funny with like how terrible those verses were. Like you weren't supposed to take them seriously. And I think some people have kind of pointed that to Tyler the Creator because some of his early stuff is so ridiculously over the top that it's like it may have just been like a role he was playing. Maybe he was doing it to attract attention, or maybe he was just trying to be funny. Like he has this one song that I can't say the name of it or even attempt to because we are on this is a not a explicit podcast, but it is so over the top gross with hip hop stereotypes of misogyny and just blatant random like sexism. It's kind of the same thing I said. Like sexually explicit lyrics. Like it's like disgusting to listen to, but it's like at the same time it's so over the head that it feels like he's doing it for a reason. Like at one point he has a line that says like massage my shoulders or something. It just sounds like comical when you look back at it. I know that's not really the album that we're talking about, but I can see why you avoided him in the past. But Igor might be a good way to see a different side of him.
I'll try it out. Like I said, I have had little to no exposure. I This may sound like a weird comparison. Am I? Yeah, I'll go there. To me, to me, it's like kind of like, things that were popular and you just kind of missed it. You know what I mean?
Oh, okay, yeah.
That's kind of how I feel. I was gonna say like SpongeBob, like for example, that was huge, but I just kind of missed it, and so I was just like, yeah, I won't bother with it, stuff like that. But I'll try it
Interesting
out.
comparison. I just imagine you like as a little kid, like SpongeBob. Nah, I kind of missed it. Whatever. It's not that. It's not that. It's not for me. It's whatever. Oh, while you're at it, Caleb, let's get your number 7.
Oh, okie dokie. Let me see. My number 7 actually was Nevermind by Nirvana. And I
Okay.
feel like, yeah, I feel like I don't have a whole lot more to say on it. I feel like we kind of
Hmm.
discussed it when it was on the list. Um, it's pivotal. It made a huge impression on rock and roll. And like I said, when it happened, it was just like a shift. Like, honestly, the early 90s, I don't know why, but it was just such a shift for music in general. Because, like, if you think about rock and hip hop, like rock and rap, it went from, the late 80s where you had bands like, you had the hair bands, you had, and I love them, but like Styx, well, that's kind of late 70s. But you get the idea. REO Speedwagon, uh, let's see, Kiss, for example, like all very like big, showy, colorful, and then it just was such a sudden like shift to Nirvana. And same thing with hip hop in the 80s. They had like the, colorful outfits. There was Rakim with the Rakim.
Rakim and
Okay,
Eric B.
yeah.
Yep.
No,
Hmm.
who with the polka dots? Kwame. That's what I'm thinking of.
Oh,
Like
comment. Yeah.
Kwame with the polka dots and stuff like
Mhm.
that. So, and then like early 90s, everything just shifted. So I don't know. I feel like Nirvana contributed to that, and I felt like no, it deserves to be on this list.
Yeah. I completely get it.
Absolutely.
Mhm. So for number 7 for me, I have an album that came out in 2013, which I feel like
Mhm.
was another pivotal year in music. That's the year that Acid Rap came out and a couple more really good albums. And for me, this is probably gonna be very surprising, but it's Love in the Future by John Legend.
Ooh.
And I was raised on John Legend. Like my dad would blast, well, he wouldn't really blast, he would play it at a normal, acceptable volume. But I would listen to his first, not Get Lifted, his second album after that. Why is that one escaping me? I used to listen to Evolver on repeat because my dad would never turn it off. And Evolver is actually where I discovered hip hop because I heard Andre 3000's verse and I was like, ooh, this is cool. I like this. But before that, we would listen to a lot of the album that once again was the album that we kept listening to. And by Love in the Future in 2013, I wasn't in the car with my dad all the time anymore because he wasn't around. And also I was taking the bus to school and stuff. Like the whole family situation changed. But Love in the Future felt like, okay, this is me getting into John Legend. Like this is a guy who I was literally raised on. And Love in the Future, like this feels like an album that I'm picking out. And I love the concept of it. And I love the way that and of course, that's just what his big single, All of Me, that's the album that it came from.
Mhm.
And I love the way that he interpolates the idea of the album to fit with the theme because Love in the Future, it uses like Evolver was like a very like funk, almost like kind of like almost like a technified version of John Legend, which felt
Mhm.
really weird because once again was such like a throwback R&B album, and then 2 years later he comes out with almost like this Lupe Fiasco lasers type of shift into like this electronic style music. And I
Mhm.
felt like Love in the Future was a great way to balance the two because I feel like he used a lot of modern production styles, almost futuristic sounding production styles, hence Love in the Future, but he still kept his old school vocals on it. And I think that's why it stands out from Evolver because it feels like a perfect blend of older John Legend and newer John Legend because he's always kind of been a mix in between. Um, and a lot of the melodies, I still hear them when I write songs. And like a lot of the things that go into it, like I've listened to this album so much that like I can't, like it influences almost every song. Every time I'm writing out a hook or something musical, it influences almost everything I do and produce because I can still hear all of those melodies. One of my favorite songs on there is Tomorrow, What If I Told You, Angel featuring Stacey Barth. Caught Up is another great song. Um, there's just so many standouts from this album. Obviously, All of Me is the most popular one. Open Your Eyes, The Beginning. It's just a fantastic album. And I was like, because I don't listen to it as much as I used to back then. And I'm like, is it really in my top 10? But like, I can't say that it's not because it really does influence a lot of the music that I do. And I feel like his latest albums, he hasn't really topped this one. I still think this is his best album, honestly.
Hmm.
Hmm. You know who
I'm
else I
surprised
like?
to see John Legend so high for you.
Mm-hmm. It was a big part of my childhood. And I think this is kind of like John Legend was kind of like forced on me. It was like, we listen to this. And this was like, oh, okay, I do listen to this because I was like, oh, I like Love in the Future. I like this. So
Mhm.
kind of
I
like
mean,
I made John Legend my own with this album. Like we like as witnesses, we always say that we make the truth our own. Like I made John Legend my own with Love in the Future. That's what it felt like.
It's funny. That's
John Legend was the friends you made along the way.
I kind of feel like on my top 10 list, definitely some of like the earlier stuff. And honestly, my next pick too, I feel like kind of is like, oh, we listened to this. Like my Tupac and like the what's it called, Biggie and stuff like that. That's just stuff that was always played when I was younger. And now I'm like,
Oh,
oh,
really? Okay.
this is what we like. Oh yeah, my parents.
So big hip hop in your house?
Oh, growing up, like when I discovered country and stuff, that was more when I was in high school. But growing up, oh yeah, like gangster rap,
Oh, okay.
110%.
That's interesting.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
like Wu-Tang Clan, Cream,
Yeah. See, and
all that
my
stuff.
dad was born in
Mobb
the
Deep.
60s, and he was part of that like early generation of black folk that hated rap, and he actively tried to keep me away from it. He thought it was the stupidest crap he'd ever heard. And like he worked his hardest to make sure I never listened to it. But unfortunately, he bought a lot of John Legend albums, and some of those albums had rap verses. It was gonna happen at some point. I was gonna discover it. But it's so interesting how like your parents like played you a lot of gangster rap, and then you ended up discovering country and other music. And me, it was the exact opposite. I was raised on
Mm.
R&B, and I was taught there's no genres behind except for R&B, and you don't listen to rap ever. And yeah, that's not really how it ended up playing out, but that's very
Funny
interesting.
how things work out.
Yeah, I
Oh
know.
yeah.
So we can go ahead to number 6. This is a very classic album. I almost feel like I don't have enough to say about it. If my brother was here, he'd have more to say about it. But this is Songs in the Key of Life by, of course, the iconic Stevie Wonder. Um, I mean, this is the song that Isn't She Lovely came from. We could almost just leave it at that because
One
that's
Yeah.
one
one of
of
the
the
most
songs
beautiful songs ever written.
for
Hmm.
real, for real. And I play it every chance I get. Like I'll be doing a jazz set with my band, and I'll be like, "Hey, let's play Isn't She Lovely?" Like it's one of the few songs I've learned in like 5 or 6 different keys just so I can play it, and it's gorgeous. And then of course the arrangement, the incredible arrangement of the horns on Sir Duke. He says one of my brother's favorite songs. When I was trying to make him a super group, he didn't really take it as seriously. But for him, I chose Stevie Wonder to be like the lead vocals and pianist because he absolutely loves Stevie Wonder. And Stevie Wonder is one of the reasons why was how he was able to teach himself how to play piano because he would listen to him. And I think Stevie Wonder definitely needs, like, not just deserves to be, he needs to be on the top 10. I completely agree with that. And I think Songs in the Key of Life is the album to do it. I am
Mhm.
completely agree with this pick, and I think it's a perfect spot as well.
Yeah, I'm totally happy with this pick and this placement. I think it's deserving of 6.
Hmm.
It's great.
I don't feel like I personally know enough about Stevie Wonder. I've definitely heard his songs. I could be wrong. I don't think it's this one. It might be that album or it might not be. But wasn't there one album where he like it was just him, like just him and the piano? Just the album was just him and the piano. Yeah, I can fact check it later or something like that.
I don't think, well, I mean, Sir Duke had a lot of production behind it, so I don't think this is that one because Sir Duke had drums in it. It was a nod to Duke Ellington,
Okay.
and it had like a whole horn arrangement on it that was kind of like a throwback to big band. And another reason why I think Kind of Blue should be up here because again, but anyway, so I don't think this is that album, but I wish I knew it. I think I know what you're talking about, but I just can't think of it off the
Mm.
top of my head.
I
Yeah.
don't, like I said, so I don't feel like I know enough about Stevie Wonder to really say it, but you guys seem confident that he deserves to be there. So I'm just gonna go with the crowd on this one. Be like, yes, we agree. He deserves to be here.
Just fit in with the populace.
Am I
I
cool
definitely
now?
agree. And again, I feel like I don't have as much to say about it because he kind of speaks for himself. Like the
Mm,
music, Stevie
yeah.
Wonder, his legacy, it just speaks for itself. So yeah, I think this definitely belongs here, and I think it's a great choice. So as far as my number 6 of all time, this one did more for me than it did for music in general. But at number 6, I have Birth of the Cool by Miles Davis, which, I was talking to Ty a little bit about too. Like, I definitely feel like Kind of Blue was more influential as a jazz album compared to the rest of the world, and compared to jazz. And I feel like if you want to represent jazz in the top 10, Kind of Blue is definitely the way to go. And you even mentioned like Miles' album, Bitches Brew, which was a really good album too. Um, but for me, like Boplicity, I hear that song from Birth of the Cool and I relax. Like it's so soothing to me to hear those horned arrangements. It feels very beautiful. It doesn't feel frantic. It's cool jazz. This is the start of cool jazz. And like if cool jazz had like blown up the way that bebop did, we'd be talking about this album very differently. But cool jazz just kind of existed in its own realm, and then it kind of morphed into smooth jazz once Kenny G came out, and it kind of died after that, you could say. So that's why Birth of the Cool isn't known that much. And like it kind of feels like Miles Davis like started a new genre of jazz and then just kind of left to go do sketches of Spain. It was like, all right, cool jazz. Here you go. All right, I'm gonna head out, but you guys have
Later.
fun. Yeah, peace out. But I remember like I made all county as a bari sax player back when I was in 11th grade of high school, and this song Boplicity, there was a solo by Jerry Mulligan, and it was written into my part. And I remember like, oh man, it was pretty tough for me as an 11th grade kid, trying to learn it. And then I put it on so I could listen to it, try to play it. And I remember I heard it and I just got it. I got everything Gary Mulligan was trying to express with his bari sax. I didn't even have to try. I barely even had to read the music to play it. It came out because I could hear it. I heard what he was doing. Having the written music was very helpful as well, but I haven't connected in that way with a jazz song ever. So this album is my top jazz album. And also has my top jazz song in Boplicity of all time. And that's
Hmm.
why I think it belongs here. I don't think it's as influential to jazz and the rest of the music as like Kind of Blue. So like if I was doing like a more influential album, I'd probably substitute Kind of Blue here. And that's why I put it in my honorable mentions. But to me, Birth of the Cool, this is my album right here.
So would you say it's the one that made you appreciate jazz today?
Yeah, I would definitely. I mean, I think I would still love jazz and I would still play it if I hadn't heard this album. But I feel like this is my personal connection to
It brought
jazz.
it here. It took
Yeah.
it from the brain to the heart.
Because again, when you're learning about jazz in school, you're force fed a lot of stuff. Here, play
Hmm.
this. Here, play this. Listen to this. Learn this. Play this. Like how I said, John Legend, we listen to this and it's kind of force fed it to you. This
Yeah.
is my discovery of jazz. This is me saying, like, oh, I found this. I like this. I want to emulate this.
Yes. And you know what? That's what Almarema was for me. That
Hmm,
was
I love
I
that.
hear this, I found that, I want to be this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So, Caleb, what do you have for number 6?
Ooh, number 6. Let me see. Enter the Wu Tang by
Man,
Wu Tang Clan.
you weren't kidding about being raised on gangster rap.
Oh, I was serious. Man, there's like this whole stereotype. Like, if you wake up and you hear like, gospel or whatever, like you're like, dang, oh, I know we're gonna clean today. Like, when you wake up and get out of bed as a kid.
Mm-hmm.
Me, if I woke up and I heard, let's see, what's his name? If I woke when I was a kid, if I woke up and I heard Ghostface Killer blaring or something like that, I was like, dang it, we're gonna be cleaning today. Like Ghostface Killer, ODB, like all of them. That was our cleaning music. Just imagine mopping the floor and all you hear is run like you're getting chased through the school zone. But hey, everyone's different. But me, I definitely that one I feel like has to be on my top 10. It's number 6 because one, Cream is iconic, you
Yeah.
know.
Mhm.
Castro is everything around me. Cream.
Cream,
Yeah.
get
Yeah.
the money. Yeah, exactly. Cream's iconic. I love that song. I'll still torture Erica with it to this day. You know, my wife. You know, when I get that itch, you know.
Yeah.
But me, it just has a really like close place in my heart. Just growing up
Mhm.
listening to it and stuff. So it's number 6, more for sentimental reasons.
And also, like, what a great like debut
I
Yeah,
from
know.
yeah.
like what a strong way to like enter the world and say, hey, we're Wu-Tang Clan.
Oh yeah, exactly. What am I saying? Yeah, sentimental reasons, but like you said too, like that jump started a bunch of rappers' career off the bat. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Method Man, uh, Redman. Am I making that up? I don't know. Method Man, ODB, Ghostface, like
Hmm.
the rest of the gang, like that is shoot. They all like hopped on. And if you ever see like the music video Cream for that movie, it's for that song, it's hilarious because like they'll be singing the hook, but they all got like toothbrushes in their mouth for some reason. So just you'll just see like a dude rapping with the toothbrush in his mouth. And I remember
Okay.
that.
Well, I know Ty and I are definitely gonna I'm definitely gonna have to brush up on my Wu-Tang because we're gonna go see Jizza and Coda the Friend in July. They're coming down to Florida. So we're gonna be going to that concert. Hey, if you want to come down to Florida, Caleb, feel free to tag along. But yeah, I'm gonna definitely have to brush
How
up
much are their
on
tickets?
Mine. Because I've heard
We'll
oh,
listen to
how much are
36 Chambers
tickets?
on the way. We'll
Yeah,
we'll listen
yeah.
to it on the way.
I don't think the tickets are that expensive. I haven't really looked at it yet. Well, I'll have to let you know. I'll hit you back.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
but like I've listened to Only Built for Cuban Links by Raekwon, which was, another influential album. Um, I'm not gonna confirm or deny on here whether I've heard all of Enter the Wu-Tang because I feel like people would stop respecting me as like a hip hop person who speaks about it. But have heard Only Built for Cuban Links, and I feel like that's also a very influential album in its own right. So yeah,
Mhm.
I feel like I'm learning so much about the way you grew up because I didn't realize this was the music that you grew up with. Because again, like this was the music that my parents tried to keep me away from, which is so funny.
You
Yeah.
learn a lot about a man from his top 10 albums.
You really do.
Yeah, yeah, I
You
guess
really
so.
do. Mm-hmm. All right, Ty, what do you have for number 6?
So my number 6 is the correct choice for Nirvana's best album. And
Okay.
it is not Nevermind, and it is not In Utero.
Wow.
It is the MTV Unplugged session. It is a live studio album
Okay.
that they performed.
I'll allow it.
I had
I'll
Nevermind.
allow it.
I had Nevermind on this spot for a long time, and then of I thought of MTV Unplugged, that session, and it it is Nirvana. Like it is stripped back. It is mostly acoustic, but it is Kurt. I should say it's less Nirvana. It is Kurt Cobain. It is him a few months before his suicide. I believe it's the last thing that was recorded and released before his death. And it is some of the most beautiful renditions of his songs. He has one of my favorite artists of all time, one of my favorite songs of all time. He does a cover of "The Man Who Sold the World" by David Bowie that sends chills down my spine. He has some Meat Puppets covers, which is that's another kind of older rock band.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but everything that is on this album is, I think, proof that Kurt Cobain had such untapped potential in his career going forward that, I think we were robbed of because he passed away so shortly afterwards, that he kept his energy and he kept his showmanship on such a stripped back, intimate scale. And I think some of his songs work even better because of it. You know, Nirvana is known for how like dirty sounding it is and how like rough it is at times. I think Kurt Cobain proved that it's not just the songs, it's him. He is the secret sauce that made Nirvana Nirvana, and it's why Nirvana couldn't go forward after his death. It's why it's
Yeah.
what led oh my goodness, I'm Dave Grohl to forming the Foo Fighters instead, and continuing his musical journey down that way. But at the same time, I also think it's one of the best live performances that I've ever heard. Because I've been to concerts, I've seen live sets done, but never have I heard a record of a live performance sound as good as it would in person, if that makes sense. Like it
Mhm.
captured the appeal of a live set in a recorded format, and it's oh, chef's kiss.
Yeah. I feel like all I have to do is just agree because like I said, there's a certain energy from live performances that I don't think I appreciated as much until because like usually I kind of shy away from live albums because I'm like, well, I want to hear like the studio recorded thing.
Mhm.
Um and who just did one? PJ Morton did one that I didn't really like too much. Um
Mhm.
but there's a lot of live albums that are just different than the studio.
Yeah,
Hmm.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Honestly, just hearing you talk about it and you were like, oh, it gives me chills. I immediately went to my phone and typed it, and I'm like, okay, okay. After this is what I'm gonna listen to when I'm driving.
Add
It
I
this
want
to
to
the
check it
list.
out.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's
exactly.
Yeah. I'm
good.
with you.
If the only song you listen to is the cover of The Man Who Sold the World by David Bowie, if you can only listen to one song, listen to that song, and that will set the tone if you want to listen to the rest of it.
Hmm.
It's very, 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 very good. Especially if you liked Nevermind, Caleb, I think you'll
Ooh,
really love this if you've never heard it before.
bet.
So now at number 5, we have Blonde by Frank Ocean. Fantastic album, first of all. Um, a great R&B album. You know, probably like you said, if you don't consider Beyonce's Lemonade to really be an R&B album because it's not strictly R&B, you could say this is the best R&B album of 2016 easily. Um, I don't know if I see it as oh, of course, we're talking about Blonde by Frank Ocean. I didn't mention
Mhm.
it yet. I don't know if I did yet, actually. Anyway, I don't know if I can say it's number 5 of the best albums of all time. Because to me, there's got to be like not only does it have to be really good to be up here at this high on this list, but it also has to have like a really pivotal impact on the industry itself. And until this point, the only album that I had really heard of that did that was Channel Orange by Frank Ocean because I heard that was really good and I heard like kind of the impact. But like I didn't even know Blonde came out in 2016. Now maybe I'm just not as plugged in, but I feel like this one because again, I feel like once you get up to the top 10, like you kind of have to have the perfect balance of critical and commercial success and just industry impact and legacy. And I don't know if I can say Blonde has that. I think it definitely belongs on the list of the top 100. I listened to it and I was like, this album is just stunningly beautiful. Um, but is it more beautiful than What's Going On by Marvin Gaye? I don't know. I don't know if I could put it above Trouble Man. I definitely couldn't put it above Kind of Blue because I feel like Kind of Blue is definitely way more influential. So if it was up to me, I would probably just like straight out swap this one with Kind of Blue and be like, "Oh, you guys just got the numbers mixed up because you meant Blonde was 25 and
25
Kind of Blue was 5."
was
That was just a
5. Yeah.
typo. I get it. I get it because again, Taylor Swift's 1989 was not better than Miles Davis's Kind of Blue, and that's what
I
they have it right now.
I think Blonde is definitely the most misplaced on this top 10. Like as much as I think like Back to Black, I don't think belonged in the top 10. I would rather
Mhm.
have Back to Black up here than Blonde up here because I just think
Yeah.
Blonde is not a top 5 of all time. Top, like better than Stevie Wonder songs in the Key of
Hmm.
Life. I don't think it's as influential or as I don't know, maybe to my taste. I mean, I really enjoy
Yeah.
Blonde and Channel
Yeah.
Orange. I
And
love
again,
Frank
this
Ocean,
is
but
this is not hating on it, but this is like if I saw one of Lupe Fiasco's albums, who's my favorite artist of all time, if I
mhm.
saw it in the top 10, I'd be like, top 10? Really? I
Really?
don't really know if I don't really know. I would make the argument for it being there, of course, but I would still be a little unsure. So I'm glad I got to listen to it, and I'm glad this list introduced me to it. But
Hmm.
all it told me is that this is a bit of a reach.
How about you, Caleb?
Yeah, no, I don't think he. No offense to him, I don't think he deserves to be on the top 10. I mean, I've heard some of his songs. I'm not going to sit here and say I've heard that album. It might be an amazing album. That's one of the things that I'll go back and listen to after this. But honestly, there's a lot of different musicians who I really feel like should be who deserve to be on here for the impact they've made, and I don't think he's made that.
Yeah, listening to the podcast, they were talking about how great this album is and why they liked it so much. And I kind of like the way that they spoke about it. I don't know if the same people that talked about it were the ones that did it. Um, but I'm like, I want you to look me in my eyes and tell me why why Blonde is here instead of a Marvin Gaye album. I
Yeah,
want you to look me in my face and tell me why
because
is this
they
here instead of Kind of Blue by Miles Davis?
I remember
Like,
in the podcast they said the term like there's a before Blonde came out and an after Blonde came out in an era of music. And I'm like,
I
maybe
don't
I'm not touched
see
into the
that.
indie side of R&B enough to
Yeah.
tell, but I have not heard a before Blonde and after Blonde when it comes to style and production and like that
Yeah.
level of influence to be like a benchmark. It's
Now,
really great. Don't
oh
take
yeah.
away that it's not great. It's a great album. I don't think it's fifth of all time.
Now
Exactly.
I told Ty this too. I was like, now I listened to Pink and White, and I think that's my favorite song on the album. And
Hmm.
if Frank Ocean and Beyonce ever decide to make a collaborative album, now we might be talking about one of the greatest albums of all time, because that would be absolutely incredible.
That album will get you pregnant. Like listening
Yes.
to it. Like
That then we might be talking about, yeah. But
Fair though. No, yeah. I
that's
see what you're saying.
right. But they didn't, and so. But again, we can at least talk about what our type five is. And so Ty, what is your top five album?
well, it's definitely an album that only I would put in a top 5.
Okay.
This album is my favorite album of all time that I could only justify putting it at number 5 because I do not think it is necessarily the best album ever. It is of course Stadium Arcadium by the Red Hot Chili Peppers. I think kind of hypocritical of me to say Blonde doesn't deserve to be up there and I put a Red Hot Chili Peppers album in the top 5.
Well,
But for
this is
me,
more personal,
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
no, yeah. This is a me pick 100%. I think this is the Chili Peppers firing on like it feels like they are for the first time fully in sync on this album. They have they were more influential with something like Blood Sugar Sex Magic from the
Hmm.
90s with its funk rock that was way more influential to alt rock later down the line. But this is the album that won them a bunch of Grammys. It won Rock Album of the Year in 2006. And it is the one that they kind of stretched their musical stylings to their limits at this point. The Peppers have been defined by multiple eras throughout their life because they've been around since the 80s as a band, and they have changed their sound a lot through then. This album is a double LP that they kind of master each one of those sounds that they've hit along the way, and they stretch it out, and they make it theirs. I mean, this is where John Frusciante, who I think, again, in retrospect, will be revered as one of the greatest like rock guitarists of his generation. I think he is, to this day, like if you go back and listen to like his solo records that he did after this album, because he went off on his own and he started making his own music, he's a magician on the guitar. The man is doing things that my brain doesn't always comprehend, and he's layering and he's playing with these sounds that are so unique, and you can tell that he just loves the guitar and he wants to do these crazy and weird things. He wants to experiment on it. And this is the album that I think is where he started to really experiment on the guitar. And of course, Flea, my one of my favorite musicians of all time, amazing on the bass. Chad Smith killing it on the drums. Anthony Kiedis is just kind of there. He has one of like his most poetic songs on this album, with Wet Sand. It's very tender, it's very emotional. I wouldn't say he's the great lyricist, because most of the time it's a bunch of gibberish and nonsense, but I think for the most part, John Frusciante's playing on this album was the first time I listened to an album and I had an emotional connection to it. It wasn't just fun to listen to. It wasn't just enjoyable to my ears. But when I think I was 8 or 9 at the time that this came out, my brother had the album, he was playing it. This was the first album that like I felt something from the music. And it wasn't just, oh, music is just on in the background. It's the first time that music became mine and the emotions behind it were mine. And it changed the way that I viewed music going forward. And so it is going to have a place in my heart that will never be replaced by anything ever. And on top of that, I think it's a darn good record that I think you should check out.
And no one will take that away from you, Ty. And I completely agree. I was kind of surprised the Red Hot Chili Peppers didn't even make it on the list, which is a little insane, but we'll have to unpack that a little bit later.
My number 5 was Sweet Baby James by James Taylor.
Okay.
I'm not sure if you're familiar with him. I keep on saying that before every single person I say. Sorry about that. But he's more of like a New England, like kind of folk singer, and he's made like a lot of good stuff. But I really like that album in particular. It has songs like Fire and Rain, obviously Sweet Baby Jane, Country Road. And that's just one of those picks where I said where it's definitely more for me. More personal, sentimental. It just reminds me like when I was a kid and it would be like fall and we're driving down the road or something like that, doing like a road trip or something like that. It just, it gives me warm fuzzies,
Warm and
so
fuzzies, yeah.
exactly. So all my other picks where I said, like to pimple. Oh, whoops, I skipped. But my other picks that I said, like All Eyes on Me and everything, were Nirvana. I had like really good reasons, like, oh, the impact they made. But as we slowly go into my 5, there's less of a,
It
oh
gets
my
more
God.
personal. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just like
exactly.
I love it too much.
Yeah. So if I was to tell you that Stevie Wonder, Brandy, Shaka Khan, Gloria Estefan, Ray Charles, Queen Latifah, Heavy D, Brian McKnight, Charlie Wilson, Funkmaster Flex, Ron Isley, Babyface, Tamia, and Barry White all made an album together, how would
I've
you
already
react?
I've already forgotten half the people that you mentioned were on this album.
I didn't Michael Jackson sing "We Are the World"? Is that song? Maybe. No, I'm kidding. I'm
Like
joking.
that is quite a super group. If you were to
Yeah,
talk about a super group.
It's an ensemble
exactly.
cast, right? Exactly.
Mhm.
And
What is
that
this?
that is my number 5 pick, Q's Juke Joint. This is the album Q's Juke Joint. It is by Quincy Jones, who is the greatest producer of all time, in my opinion. And I think the people at Apple Music would agree with that based upon their list, as we'll see as we get a little bit higher. But this is the album that I also grew up on. And it's one of those albums that I heard it so much as a kid, I didn't realize how good it was because I would just listen to it over and over and over again. Because it came back out in 1995. And I didn't realize how fantastic it was until I grew up, went back to it, and I was like, this album is incredible. Oh my gosh. Like the horn arrangements and guys like if you ever heard They Reminisce Over You by Pete Rock and CL Smooth, that
Mhm.
iconic saxophone line that was
Mhm.
played by Tom Scott. Tom Scott was one of the
Okay.
saxophonists on Q's Juke Joint. On Cool Joe, Mean Joe, which is the song featuring Queen Latifah, and she goes back and forth between rapping and singing on this song. And then he turns it into a whole jazz arrangement in Josh Redman's solo on Cool Joe, Mean Joe, Killer Joe. That's what made me want to play saxophone. Like I used to think there's a lot of different things that made me want to play saxophone, but like this solo, I could sing it because it was so incredible. And I recently got to see Joshua Redman live, and it was an amazing experience. But like this album, it in fact impacted me so much as a kid, but I don't realize growing up. And I think it doesn't get as much acclaim because it kind of seems like a party album, like Huge Strict Joint. He just got all these popular artists in the studio and kind of like had a party. But like
Mhm.
the amount of musical talent in one room, like on Moody's Mood for Love, Brian McKnight took a saxophone solo by James Moody and added words. So he's doing with his voice what someone does on the saxophone, and
Hmm.
it's unheard of. And like he's singing because singing is very different than playing saxophone. He's adding flat ninths and minor thirds and doing all kinds of runs with words that like he wrote out to make this song happen. um Shaquille O'Neal somehow found his way on this album rapping on Stomp.
Oh, that didn't have
um
to happen.
What?
yes. Well, Shaquille O'Neal did rap for a little bit. And yeah, he has a verse on Stomp. Heavy D absolutely destroys Rock With You with Brandy, like a cover of a Michael Jackson song. Phil Collins makes an appearance. One of my favorite songs is It Love That We're Missing by Gloria Estefan. Um, I just think this album, it encompasses like it's definitely an R&B jazz album, and it has an impact of hip hop in it as well, and it encompasses some of my favorite genres and the best things about R&B and jazz, I feel like. And I feel like it should really have more acclaim because like again, it's an album that you can like dance to, but also like really just take a second and listen to and be like, this is absolutely incredible. And so like I had a hard time trying to decide between this one and Thriller, but personally, I think there's more talent on this album, is my argument for why I have it here at number 5.
Hmm. That is very interesting. I have never listened to Q's Juke Joint.
It's
Yeah, I'm gonna look it up.
definitely it's definitely a more of like an indie cut, or I don't even know the right way to describe it. Like
Like a
it's
deep
not well
cut.
known. Yeah, kind of a deep cut. Because again, at this point, Quincy Jones had his hand in almost everything as far as the
Mhm.
music industry goes. He used to be a band leader like Duke Ellington, and he just weaved his way through so many different genres of music. And now he's here with this album that he's bringing a bunch of musicians onto. And so it's it was really impactful more to me as far as what it did for the music industry. It didn't really do anything. So I see why Apple Music doesn't even have it on their list. Because again, I think most people look at it like, oh yeah, it's like a little party album. And like literally the album cover is just like him sitting in a chair. And like it looks like he's just in the club. Like that's the album cover. So like
Yeah.
it doesn't really attract a lot, but like listening to it, and I think it also gets it kind of got miscast as a jazz album, which it is, but it's also an R&B album. And I would say it's more R&B than it is jazz. So maybe that would have helped. Um, but it's fantastic and one of my favorite albums of all time.
Nice.
All right, so up next we have number 4, which is Purple Rain by Prince and the Revolution. No real surprise here. I think again, I think it's perfect in its spot. I don't think it should be higher. I don't think it should be lower. It's so interesting because it's like back in the day, Prince, like I hear like Prince and Michael Jackson were like the Drake and Kendrick of our day. Like Prince was known as the guy who was really into music and like had a lot more, like people say he had more like musical like theory knowledge and more like that technical kind of skill, like how Kendrick is more of like a technical rapper who like understands lyrical wordplay and stuff, and Drake is just kind of more popular. And people thought that Michael Jackson, while supremely talented, obviously, and comparing Michael Jackson's Drake talent to Drake's is like not a fair comparison. But Michael Jackson was known for just being really popular, but Prince's music was known for being very complex chords wise and chord structure wise. Michael Jackson's music was known for being a little bit more simpler. So there was always kind of a competition scale back and forth between the two of them. And I love that Prince still ends up this close to, well, I feel like I'm kind of revealing who's up there. But I feel like this is a good spot for Prince. I feel like this is where he deserves to be for his album. Um, I mean, obviously, he's one of the greatest musicians of all time. A lot of people have him as their favorite artist. I got the privilege of playing Purple Rain live one time, and I remember we were with this amazing singer, and everyone was kind of like they passed it around. Like there was a piano solo, and then I started like a saxophone solo that was kind of improvised. And usually, like compared to jazz, like when I'm taking a solo, I will kind of build it up a little bit, like start a little lower and then kind of build it up to get to the excitement level. And everybody's like, "Hey man, what are you doing with your solo?" And I was like, "What do you mean?" He was like we're at this high energy peak where I reach the end of my solo and then you're just like bringing everything down and like slowly coming back up." And I'm like, "Well, that's what you do." And they're like, "No, no, match me. Come in the way I ended.
Be up
And
here.
you can bring it down because you're sucking out the life of our whole energy of what we're doing." And
Right.
I
I'd
thought it
set all
was
that energy up and you just squander it.
yeah, and it's like it's very interesting because it's very different from because like it's almost like every especially when playing funk or something, like every solo change it kind of resets. Even on Q's Juke Joint, like if you listen to Killer Joe, every solo resets kind of the form. It kind of resets the excitement. Like Herbie Hancock just playing this incredible solo was like going all over the place with the synth keyboard. And then at the end, Joshua Redman comes in, it's like da 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 da. Just very simple. Like you could tell, and everything kind of brought back down. But like it's like it was one of those moments that made me realize, like, oh, I'm not playing jazz right now. I'm playing a different style. Let me make sure I get in the style because they were like going, building, building. We hit this incredible piano solo. Now, saxophone, when you come in screaming and wailing and playing all these notes, and then you can bring it down towards the end of your solo. And like I said, just like a small little story, but I feel like that's again, that's what Prince brought. I don't think we'd have that. I wouldn't have had that conversation if Prince wasn't here because that idea, that way of performing wasn't really around until he was. And it had a huge impact on me just for looking at different styles of music. And Yeah, Purple Rain, and I think Purple Rain is his best album. And it
Yeah.
turned into a movie that won an Oscar.
Yep.
This is perfect.
Yeah, I think honestly myself, there's another album that I think it could, to me, replace 2 spots ahead of it that I think is
Oh,
better
really?
than a certain other album
Interesting.
that we'll get to. I think this album is amazing. It perfectly captures the 80s. Like when I like this sounds I think we live in a time where like an 80s revival has really hit us, and a lot of things from the 80s have become glamorized. I think Purple Rain is something that was always like, it was always there. It never needed to come back because it never left to begin with,
Hmm.
yet it still captures that same sound. Like it sounds like absolutely like you don't have to tell it was you don't have to look it up that it came out in 84
Yeah.
because it feels like it did. Prince is an amazing artist. While it may not have some of my personal favorite tracks that he's done, I think Purple Rain is his best. It is peak Prince.
Hmm. I mean, when you were mentioning like iconic things from 1984 that are kind of making a comeback today, like I don't know about you, but I instantly thought of David Lynch's Dune. Like to me,
Mhm.
that just fits in that category. Too soon, too soon. Okay. Uh, so yeah, I mean,
Speaking of Oscar winners.
oh god, oh god. Um, so speaking of which, now we're at number four. And I feel
Mhm.
like I said, the more we agree with an album's placement, it's almost like the less we have to say about it because we're not really comparing it to other stuff. We're just like, yeah, this belongs here, this
Mhm.
fits, and I couldn't agree more. So my number four
Mhm.
is an album that, again, I think it came out in 2015, but you put me onto it. You tried to put me onto it on 2016, and I was too young to get it.
Oh,
And I
something I
didn't
put you
fully
onto?
something you put me onto, which again doesn't really make sense because it's an R&B album too. So again, I was the one that was always putting you onto R&B, but this is something you put me onto. I didn't
Oh,
understand it when it first came out. I was like, this is weird. And then 4 years later, I gave it another listen and I was like, this is absolutely an incredible masterpiece and is now in my top four albums. And that is Ology by Gallant. Ology by Gallant is one of my favorite albums of all time. I truly think it's the best R&B album of, well, not the best R&B album of all time. So close. Uh Ty's like doing a little like celebration dance but yeah, Ology, like
wow.
when I tell you Kate and I, my wife, have listened to that album so many times, like she's been like, I love this album. She's like, but I've heard it so much, we almost
Can we
gotta like
stop
stop
listening to
listening
it for a
to it
minute?
so I can continue to love it because it's just that brilliant. And like when you think about music in general, especially R&B, it's always about love songs. Like that's the number one thing that people talk about. Um, and I mean, love is like one of the most impactful emotions any human can experience. So it makes sense that it's reflected in music that's can also reflect your emotions in such a powerful way. But Ology is so much deeper, and I've never heard an R&B album get this deep and this introspective. It's like Gallant's having like an emotional depth conversation with himself. He's talking about faith, he's talking about belief in God, he's talking about belief in himself, he's talking about his emotions, how sometimes he feels betrayed by them, sometimes he doesn't understand where he's coming from. He's talking about like and just the vivid imagery he paints in his songs. I think one of my favorite lines is from Counting, and he says we built a glass monastery on top of fault lines. And it's like what a beautiful image, first of all. And there's so
Mhm.
many layers to just that one line. Like it could be on top of like, did I like glass monastery is a place for worship. Building a glass one means it's beautiful, but it's also very fragile. And when you build it on
Mhm.
top of fault lines, it means like it could shake and fall. So is he could be talking about his a shaky relationship with faith, or he could be talking about something completely different that the lines can just be interpreted as. And
Right. And it's just a beautiful metaphor.
right. And I remember in 2016, I just graduated high school. And again, usually I love this kind of thing. I love Lupe Fiasco for it. But I was like, and I think that's the difference because not only is it complex, but it's mature. And I was not mature enough to understand it or appreciate it. I don't even think the world was mature enough to appreciate it when it came out in 2015. Well, let me make sure that it came out in 2015, first of all.
It came
But
out April 6, 2016.
2016, wow, seriously incredible year for music. That's three of my albums came out in 2016.
It
And
was a great year.
I know, and I know you had, I think Kate Tronada's album came out in 2016.
Hmm.
And there was a couple by, I don't know if Caleb had any that came out in 2016. Um, but yeah, incredible year for music. And this album, it's complex, it's deep, and it's
Yeah.
mature. It's a lot of themes like, and I didn't understand it because I hadn't felt these themes or like delved into them myself yet because I was only 18 in 2016. And
Mhm.
like as I got older, and now Kate and now I appreciate the melodies on it too. And it's it's R&B, but it's also got a lot of I feel like electronic kind of elements. Like it's not old school R&B. It's definitely more of like a modern R&B feel, the production wise.
Mhm.
Um, but the production complements his amazing voice so beautifully.
Yeah.
And my favorite song on there is Skipping Stones featuring Janae Aiko.
Beautiful song.
Um, Beautiful song. Miyazaki is one of the standout tracks. Um, I I I can't even say like if I say my standout tracks, I'm gonna go through each one.
It's gonna be every
Counting,
single song.
Perkajizik, Jupiter, Open Up. It's one of the few albums that like I come back to because I'm like, okay, let me listen to my favorite songs on this album. I found
Mhm.
myself listening to every single one. And
Mhm.
even ones that I didn't like as much at the beginning, like I didn't like Jupiter that much, now it's one of my favorites. And I can't it like it's just such a powerful and deep album. And I'm waiting for Gallant to go back on tour so we can go see him.
Mhm.
Um, I think this is definitely his best album. And I kind of think he agrees that this is his best album too. Um, and because like he's before this, he did a lot of stuff that was more about love. And his next album, Sweet Insomnia, was a much more album about love. And same with his latest one, Zebra. Not Zebra.
Mhm.
His latest one was
Neptune.
Neptune, yes. Um, and I'm like, I don't know if he can do like an ology part two, or if he can get this deep again emotionally. Um, but to me, it's definitely his by far his best album.
Yeah. I'm surprised that it hit your top 10 for best, but you know what? I get it. I love this. I'm right there with you. I love this album. A little bit of a spoiler. It didn't make my list, but
Hmm.
I do absolutely love it. I get why it's here. And you can of course check out our full thoughts on our full length review that we did of this album entirely if you want to hear a better breakdown of us
Hmm.
talking about ology. But yeah, it's severely underappreciated
Oh yes.
and
Oh yes.
under listened to. Gallant should have been a household name that he just didn't become, and maybe time will change that. But it's ology is so worth your time.
And I guess the last thing I'll say about this, I love that this is his debut studio album. I think I touched on it a little bit, how like if he had released Sweet Insomnia in 2016, that was kind of like a more popular one to like draw in fans, and then
Hmm.
released Ology, maybe he would have, been more popular and stuff.
Hmm.
Um, kind of like again, like that sophomore project being like your project that's like this is, kind of who I am. But I just love how this is where he was when he wrote this album, and this is his debut album.
Yeah.
And I mean, I'm not sure, like label executives probably were nervous to put it out because it's that deep. And when you're it's your debut album, you don't have that much of a fan base.
Hmm.
Um but it's absolutely phenomenal and it deserves way more love than it has.
Yeah, when you get that deep on a record, Will and I are gonna be there to listen to it. That's
To unpack it, yes.
our bread and butter
Uh-huh.
is an album as personal and vulnerable as that.
Yeah. And I think that's the main difference between like this and other deep projects that like Lupe Fiasco has released or stuff like that, complex lyrical ones. This is personal and vulnerable. Lupe's
Mhm.
lyricism is now I realize that's why like that's probably part of the difference, part of that maturity, why I didn't really get it in 2016, even though
Mhm.
usually I love deep albums, is because it was so vulnerable and so personal. And I'm like, I almost like wasn't ready for that. I'm like, I'm not ready to unpack these things about myself while listening
Sure.
to Gallant.
Yeah.
Um, but because like Lupe does a lot of deep lyricism, but usually it's kind of from a worldview, talking about the world. He doesn't
Hmm.
really talk about himself that
Yeah.
often. You want to have a therapy session while listening to music, you listen to this album right here. This is it.
Absolutely.
All right, so what do you
Well,
have for your number four?
Number four, I have Sound of Silence by Simon and Garfunkel. Um, I just love Simon and Garfunkel in general, but I feel like they were a really good music group. And that album in particular, I feel like is really iconic. Everyone's heard that song. But I just love the poetic nature of all of their songs, their lyricism. Um, and so that's why for me, I
very,
felt
very
like they
good
were
album.
Mm-hmm.
exactly
I do love
solid.
Sounds of Silence. It's a good Simon and Garfunkel. So for me, number four was an album shortly after listening to Stadium Arcadium. I had gone back and I started looking through like my parents' records, what music they had that I could find because now I'm beginning to listen to music. And I eventually came across Fleetwood Mac's Rumors, and
Oh,
it
okay.
very quickly became an all-timer for me. It is one of the most celebrated like pop rock albums of all time, and I think for very good reason. I don't throw this word around too much. This album's perfect, and going forward,
Wow.
the top four albums on my list for me are albums that I consider to be perfect. I would not
Wow.
change one single thing.
Okay.
It is a tight 30 something minutes on a run time for this album. Every song, every song is a banger. There's zero skips on this album. I don't need to explain Rumors to most people who have heard of this album. Uh, Go listen to it. I'm not sure if
Yeah.
you have, Will. I can't recommend it enough to you. It is a benchmark of like classic pop rock and like
Hmm.
pop music in general. This is it. Um, Christine McVie has such a beautiful voice that complements alongside Stevie Nicks. I mean, this she is outstanding and an icon, and this is where we get the legendary Dreams that has resonated with Fleetwood Mac fans or any fans of music period for ages. Um yeah, this is it's just a perfect album.
Okay.
There's not a single skip. Fleetwood Mac's best. Go listen to it.
And I think what you say, like as far as being a perfect album, I think I would agree with that for a couple of my top ones. I would say that about Ology, in that there's not a single skip. It is a
Mhm,
perfect album in that
mhm.
regard, if we're looking at not a single skip. Um, and again, that doesn't mean every single song I think is like 100%. You know, some are better than others, but I do think there's no skips, which
Yeah,
is rare for albums. Like that's not
absolutely.
easy. Um, and so like with this one, Rumors, it debuted at number 11 on Apple's top 100 list. So
Hmm.
do you feel like it should have made it into the top 10, or do you feel like that's a good spot for it comparatively? Because obviously you have it much higher, but compared to their list and what those albums have done.
So I think the thing with Rumors is for its time, I don't think it's necessarily as influential as a lot of the rest of the music around its time, because it feels like it's not necessarily doing something unique aside from, say, Stevie Nicks. Stevie Nicks, her voice is incredibly unique on this album. And she is just this powerhouse that takes control of the band at times in this brilliant way that, because Fleetwood Mac was around before her, and their sound was not quite as legendary as it was after Stevie Nicks came aboard. And so I don't think necessarily that this was doing something that blew people's minds, but what it was the perfection of those things. That when you go back and you think of the later 70s of pop rock, like even into the 80s, I would say that this is the pop album. Like, I don't think anything else did it better for the time frame.
Okay.
Now, going forward, I don't think it had the impact as to how pop music would be shaped afterwards, but yeah, it did it the best.
All right. Well, that's high praise for Rumors by Fleetwood Mac. Yeah, and I'm gonna have to add it to the list because, like I said, that's if there was music from the 70s to listen to, if it wasn't Marvin Gaye, like we weren't listening to it.
You weren't
when I
listening
grew
to
up.
it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was not an album I would have found on my parents' cabinet. Like
Nope.
that was oh, I'm in the wrong house. So that was
You were over
yeah.
at my house. If
Yeah,
you saw
exactly,
Fleetwood
exactly.
Mac.